to, yeah, I just wanted to sort of explain that Burnham, when Burnham left, he assigned the realization of the Burnham plan, of the 1905 Burnham plan, to another architect.
Okay.
And with some advice from him. So I think it's an interesting study of how, one architect interprets another architect's uh, impression and suggestions and advice about.
I guess we are complete already. So and if you have time later, you can stay while they show their second scheme. But I know you're a busy guy. But thank you for doing the lecture again.
I just came from a meeting slash interview with the Binilbian. They're writing about the Metropolitan Theater,
Oh, okay.
and I said actually we have a project with the class of gym that focuses on that area. I
Oh,
know that
yeah.
you've
Metropolitan.
turned towards that, but that's part of your gym, di ba? Of
Yes.
uh
That's
the
why
new plan.
if you have time and just curious, maybe on the side while you are, having coffee or whatever, non-committal observant, you know. Yeah, but just to see what they prepared for today. But I'm not sure if you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised or you'll be disappointed. So we'll see
I hope I'll be pleasantly surprised. As I always expect that
from
from
them.
your classes.
Yeah.
So
Well, yeah. So
yeah.
you can start anytime now, sir.
Okay. So guys, this is just just can you can you give me screen sharing, Jim?
Yeah, there you go.
I'll just ramble on. Wait.
Bitin naman yung talk niyo nila AJ. Inaantay kita mag-comment.
Ang tagal eh. I
Ah,
didn't know it was gonna be like 3 episodes, like a mini series. I just talked towards the end because
okay.
naman when architects talk, you can't get words in edgewise.
That's true.
Pag ganyan. So, okay. Can you see this, guys? Can everyone see it? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes? Okay, so I'll start na ha. All right, so I'm going to talk about the architecture of William Edward Parsons, who was appointed by Burnham in 1905 to execute his plans for Manila. Just a bit of a timeline, just to remind us. So last week, I presented the Burnham plan of Manila, the 1905 plan. So just to review, in 1904, Burnham arrived in the country upon the invitation of William Cameron Forbes, who was also informed by Governor General William Howard Taft to get Burnham. By the time Burnham arrived in the Philippines, William Howard Taft had already left to go back to Manila, to America, where he went on to become not just the head of the Supreme Court, but also eventually the president of the U.S. And his successor was William Cameron Forbes of Forbes Park, which was named after him, who invited Burnham to visit. So Burnham arrived in 1904 and then left in January of 1905. He arrived early December of 1904, and then he left in January of 1905. So approximately, he stayed for 6 weeks. No, a lot of people are surprised by this because they really thought that Burnham stayed on and lived in the Philippines for a long time. But he was actually one of the most successful American architects at that time. So it would be too much, I would suppose, to ask for him to stay here in Manila. Back then, Manila would be like as far as the moon, I suppose, if you're from America. So he left after 6 weeks. And then in 1905, he submitted the Burnham Anderson report. Anderson was Pierce Anderson, who was also his assistant. And the report was a 9-page document that included two maps, the map of Manila and the map of the boulevard, which I showed also last week. Then in November of 1905, Parsons was assigned to execute the Burnham plan, and he stayed for about 8.5 years. He left in 1913. So it was really Parsons who realized the plan of Burnham, and including the new style of architecture that they wanted to create for the Philippines. Okay, so William Parsons, known has been known and will be always known for his work in the Philippines during the American period, uh, recommended by Burnham, of course. And so his job was consulting architect for the Philippine colonial government under America. He was a practicing architect from New York, graduated from the L'École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. This is the school of architecture that espoused neoclassical, neo-baroque, revivalist architecture. Um, but he also studied at Yale University, which I think would have balanced his studies in terms of architectural styles. So his job was to supervise all public buildings and parks throughout the islands. You have to recall that Burnham's City Beautiful movement included parks, a lot of parks, and a lot of public spaces with fountains and water features that for him would result in having the citizens being better citizens because they will feel refreshed by the natural elements that are afforded by parks and water features. So Parsons, was tasked to interpret the plans of Burnham and Anderson, but also given the freedom to modify. And so since then, he supervised building projects for the office called the Bureau of Public Works. Now, what was the style of Parsons? It has been described as a hybrid of colonial architecture, which would be Spanish, and also how that architecture has been applied in the Philippines for 300 to 400 years. And so Burnham and Parsons did not do a tabula rasa of the architecture of the country by, not minding what there was already, and then creating the new architecture. So they didn't do that. They recognized the benefits and the qualities and the good qualities and the aesthetics that was already working well uh, for the architecture in the country. And then they applied that for when they did their own designs. So here it says that they use hardwoods. Tapiz shells was used by Parsons. I'm sure it was the first time he's seen that, but he realized how effective it was in cutting down glare and heat in the tropics. And so eventually, the capiz shells found its way into the designs of Parsons. Capiz shells have been scientifically proven to cut down heat and glare, in recent years. And so it's really a wonder material. And I think it's really to the benefit of our ancestors who realized that here was the shell and to put it into windows and make it such an effective device, even more effective than glass, uh, and to recognize it for the architecture. I think that's really admirable. I think it means that our ancestors were really attuned to nature and the materials that are available in the country. Okay, so here are some of Burnham's recommendation. As I said, he recognized what was already there in Manila. He particularly was pleasantly surprised with Intramuros. He thought that it was a great example of a medieval fortified town, very common in Europe uh, from the late 13th to even up to the 17th century. No, fortified towns were towns that were surrounded by walls that act as protection for against invaders and also to secure the inhabitants inside, which was what the Spanish intended to do. When they built up Intramuros, they realized that they were not in friendly territory. And so they created Intramuros, the walled city, to protect themselves. You know? So they were actually walling themselves in. And even as late as the 19th century, if you were not a resident or if you had, I think if you don't have Spanish origins or Spanish descent, you have to leave Intramuros at a certain time of the night. And the bridge, the drawbridges would be brought up. And then it will be opened again during the day. Uh, the only thing that Burnham didn't like about Intramuros was the moat around it. Again, it's typical of walled cities that uh, to have moats around it that again would serve as another layer of protection for the inhabitants. When the Americans came to the Philippines, they were somewhat, well, not just somewhat, they were really more advanced than us and even more advanced than the Spanish when it came to um, science and public health and sanitation. And I think at certain point or at certain points, they found Manila to be really dirty. And at that time, it would be a normal occurrence for communities to be brought down by cholera and dysentery. These are diseases that would attack the body uh, by bacteria coming from water, no? Especially stagnant water. Also malaria from the mosquitoes. So the recommendation of Burnham for Intramuros was to cover the moat and dry it up, cover it, and turn it into parks. Again, following the formula of the City Beautiful movement. So here is an old photo of the moat of Intramuros and one of the gates. This is an American period photo. You can see the American flag of the moat around Intramuros when it was already covered up and turned into parks and golf courses. Uh, Thankfully, it's still the area around Intramuros are still open spaces planted with greenery and golf courses because they do offer a green belt to the city, and it's good that it has not been tampered with by developers. It's actually a substantial area, the park around Intramuros. So so yeah, this is the picture, and this is, I think, the Anda Monument. This view is from the area of, I think, the Manila Hotel, looking towards Intramuros. There's a tranvia, and I think the roads were not yet concrete, not even asphalt, but more like stamped down sand and soil. and sometimes seashells, because crushed shells would minimize dust, and that was a common material for roads back then. So this is an image of, in the next series of slides, I'm going to show you examples of possibly what Burnham would have seen in the 6-week stay that he did in the Philippines. So these are examples of streets in Manila. This would also be, I guess, somewhat the same when you go inside Intramuros. These are typical 19th century houses in the Philippines, where you have the lower part that is made up of stone or concrete. I think this photo was taken already during the American period, but you know, you can still see uh, vestiges of the past. But this is the typical structures that you would find back then. These would be houses, of course, and you can see the typical characteristics of 19th century Spanish period houses slash bahay na bato. You have the tall doors, you have the tall floor to ceiling heights, and large windows, which Burnham and Parsons even made larger, especially Parsons. And you have the overhanging second floor that would be composed of rows of windows, and then the ventanillas underneath that would add not only ventilation but would be quite useful when there would be processions, religious processions, for people to look through. So this would be a typical structure or street that Burnham would have seen. So what else was he suggesting? He suggested that in terms of materials, granite, marble, or other building stones that were used in Europe or America during that time not be used in the Philippines because of its climate. Um, which means, what does it mean? It should be material that's easy to clean, easy to maintain, and of course also would be economical but still be functional. Americans are known to be practical people, and especially at this point when they were building for a colony, their first colony, they wanted uh, to fulfill the requirements of utility and stability of buildings, economy. It should be relatively easy to construct. And so this 19th century materials of marble and stone that was common in Europe because you wanted to show off, which also had a very strong Baroque tradition, was not carried off in the Philippines. But also, of course, I'm sure it would have been difficult to import those materials. So Burnham said, don't use those. Instead, let's look for a material that will be more appropriate to the country. So what did they choose? The Burnham and Parsons chose reinforced concrete, which was relatively new to the country back then. Although there were some buildings already in the 19th century when we were still under Spain that where concrete was, I'm sure parts of it were already made of concrete, but it wasn't as widespread until the arrival of the Americans. Concrete was seen as also possibly earthquake proof. And by the way, guys, when I say concrete during this time, I mean buhos. We call it buhos. Buhos meaning it's pure concrete with aggregates and uh, reinforcing metal bars, not hollow blocks, because hollow blocks came way after, maybe 40 years after. So reinforced concrete was used, and they said that the aesthetic quality of the building would depend instead on the proportions and not on the material, which is practical advice. And then Parsons also followed Burnham's advice to learn from Spanish and Philippine examples, uh, like the roofing. He actually found it charming, and I'm sure Burnham has similar roof tiles in Europe and maybe even in America, and he thought that it worked well in the country. So he also advised Parsons to continue using that. And then he liked the fact that the grid system of Manila during that time uh, turned the narrow streets into well shaded streets, and gave it protection against the harsh sun, especially in a day like today where it's really hot. He was also impressed by the old Spanish churches and government buildings, which I'll show you later. And so he said these are suggestions, these are examples of building the qualities of buildings in the Philippines that Parsons should use. So what are we learning here? We are learning here that here is an architect who did not have the ego to, just bulldoze everything and then create a new city, but actually recognize the charm of old Manila and applied it to his new building. So in a way, the architecture of Parsons could be seen as uniquely Filipino because it is a natural progression and interpretation of what came before it. We can't also say that the architecture of the Philippines during the Spanish colonial period was purely Spanish because a lot of that was also adjusted, not just with the Filipinos, but even with the builders like the Chinese and the Japanese who added their own inputs into the buildings. So these are photos of old streets. This is in Intramuros, and you can see here the tiled roofs. Then you see the flat whitewash walls. During the Spanish period, this would probably be made out of thick adobe or whatever stone was available. But here is an example of possibly concrete construction during that time. Possibly, no? But you can see here that uh, there were the, the predominance of flat walls devoid of any moldings or decoration was quite common in Manila. These are actually bridgeways. You can find this also in Europe that connects buildings, so that the inhabitants of these buildings don't have to go down to cross the street. This is quite common. Unfortunately, we don't have uh, those here anymore, all gone during the bombing of Manila. And this to the right are also examples of buildings, possibly the early part of uh, the 20th century. This was already American period. I'm not sure if this is an American-made building, but perhaps it could be. But what I wanted to show was that here in the old buildings, this is actually a good example. This is an old building from the Spanish period, which would be covered with stucco, to be finished with stucco. And this to the right is possibly an American period building, which used instead of stone and stucco reinforced concrete. So there, this is an example of interpretation of American architects. These are some houses that Burnham would have possibly seen during his time. I chose these photos because of the arches, uh, which this is probably a rich family, one of the areas in Manila, but I wanted to point out the use of arches for residentials, which was also adopted uh, by Parsons. This one, of course, has the typical high-pitched roof made out of kogon or nipa. and the large and the rows of windows that would just slide out to let the air in or the sunshine in, which was also used by Parsons for his designs. This photo here I wanted to show you because here is an example. This might possibly not be in Manila. I think this is vegan, but I just wanted to show this example of a Stockhold House. There were a lot of buildings before that would be stuccoed or plastered because it provided protection. The lime in the stucco mixture provided protection for the stone inside. And this was also used for our churches. There were a lot of churches before that would be covered with stucco. And you might be surprised to know that exposing the stones of churches is a relatively new direction, possibly in the mid 70s when there was this somebody, maybe an architect, who decided to chip off the stucco to reveal the beauty of the stone underneath without realizing that it actually removed the protection of the stones themselves, which was then followed by other churches. And so now you see most of our churches stripped of that stucco. Although I've seen in some reconstruction of churches that they're starting to put back the stucco. So maybe we're learning as we go along. This is a typical, it's called the street, which was the hub of Manila back then. This again, I would believe it's American period already. But I still wanted to show you because I don't think that even in a span of 20 years, the cityscape would have changed that much. But I just wanted to show you what Burnham would have seen during the time when he was in Manila and the rest of the country for 6 weeks. He also went to Baguio, by the way, because he planned also Baguio. This is, of course, Manila Cathedral. I wanted to show this to you because Burnham was also impressed by the qualities of the churches, like the deep loggias here that would provide shade for the sun, against the sun, and then the use of arches and roof tiles, tall ceilings. This was before, I think this is before the war. And if you notice, there is actually this elevated part of the cathedral, which is not there anymore. Uh, and also this belfry to the side. So the cathedral that you see now has been rebuilt, I think, more than 10 times since it was put up in the 16th century. But this is a photo of, I think, the closest that would have been when Burnham went to visit Intramuros. Other examples of churches that Burnham would have seen, this is, of course, an Augustine Church. And here you can see the whitewashed stucco walls that would cover the offer protection for the stones. And then you have the neoclassical elements of arches and columns, quite common in Europe during that time. Although this is 16th century, so could be much older than some of the churches in Europe that we know of. And San Agustin is really the oldest church in the country. That is the record. This to the right is Binondo Church. Again, you can see here that not all of it is exposed stone. There are some parts that are stucco. This has been destroyed during the war, so not much of it is left. You know, when they reconstruct, sometimes they lose the details, they lose the proportion that was there during the original. And so when you see Binondo now, it's not as impressive as I'm sure it was back then. And also because in the 21st century city, these buildings, which used to be the grandest and the largest back then, are now dwarfed by the condos and high rises that surrounds it. So William Parsons applied well, some people say it's called regionalism, which basically means that he recognized the context of the place where he was building, uh, where he was designing buildings for. And so this is one of his first projects. This is the Philippine Normal College back then, which was a school for teachers and nurses, because the Americans wanted to create a strong campaign for health and education. And so one of the first buildings that they would put out would be hospitals and schools as part of their program for the country. So what did Parsons apply? Broad plain surfaces of solid pastel colors, tile roofs, deep archways, shaded porches, and covered loggias to keep the heat away. These were the qualities that, of course, he saw in the houses and in the churches uh, when he arrived in the Philippines in 1905. Other photos of the PN, well, it's now Philippine Normal University, PNU. Uh, so these are glazed. You can see here the tile roofs and then gables. The gables that I think would be maybe an American addition, much like the California mission style. When you say California mission, this would be the religious uh, structures, monasteries and churches put up by the orders, Augustinians, the uh, maybe Jesuits, when they moved to California in the 19th century and put up their missions. A mission is the name of a building, but it's actually also the name for their mission, which was to evangelize native populations, maybe Indians or other indigenous populations, Mexicans of that time in California. So this mission style, which was again also the type of architecture that would be um, responsive to the climate, and of course California would be somewhat near to the Philippines. I'm sure Parsons and Burnham thought of that. The similarities of California and the Philippines, maybe in terms of light, in terms of the heat, but of course not totally. But that's the reason why sometimes the style of Parsons is called the mission style, no? The California mission style, because they came from the missions of the religious orders that were put up all over California. So this PNU, and this is the back of this building. No? So because this one is, para you can't recognize it anymore. But this is how it is presently, and this is the back of this L-shaped building. Now, this is of course a reconstruction because most of the buildings along Taft Avenue were bombed, no, during the liberation of Manila in February 1945. 30 days of constant bombing of the city, which resulted in Manila being reduced to rubble, 80% of the city. They said that at the end of the 30 days of bombing, if you stand from the post office, Manila post office now, near the Pasig, you can see all the way to Pasay. So that's how much the city was leveled off. Okay, the other project of Parsons is the PGH, which is still standing, or this part of this building. Parts of these buildings are still standing, reconstructed again, of course, after the bombing of Manila. But this is from an old image of the PGH. And you can see here how Parsons applied the arches and the deep entrances that would shield parts of the buildings from the sun. Then you have rows of open windows, which would be similar to the houses that he'd see all over, but interpreted in, I guess, the modern way during that time by using new material like reinforced concrete, which would be earthquake proof, and then newer technologies, I suppose, that he would bring in during the time, especially for plumbing, sanitary, and structural design, which we don't see uh, from the buildings when we look at them, but I'm sure were incorporated by these American architects when they built the new buildings. Remember when the Americans came in, there was still a substantial Spanish colony, Spanish population, sorry, here in the country. And the Americans wanted to flex their muscles and say, hey, you know what, we're more modern, we're richer, we're more powerful, and this is how we build. And so this was also part of the campaign of America to, to show off not just to the Filipinos, but to the rest of the world and also Asia, especially because they wanted to trade with other Asian countries during the time. That this is our version of a colony. We were the first colony of America. Back then, America did not have colonies. They were a colony of England, and parts of it France, and parts of it by Spain also. So it was actually a funny situation when they got themselves a colony. And I'm sure during that time, the world was looking at them and saying, okay, you're complaining about the colonies here of Europe and what they're doing to the new world. So now it's your turn to show us how you're going to run a colony. And so they came up with a term called benevolent assimilation, which was, we'll be a kinder colonial power than the ones from Europe who went to Asia and Africa. So this is the PGH, which was a three-story building, and the style was a sprawling pavilion type house, open air, large windows, areas that would be able to admit sunlight at the proper times of the day, and cross ventilation provided by large windows, tall ceilings, uh, views even of the bay. Um, During this time, it was already established by the Americans that there was a connection between health and good air and sunlight, which I'm sure in the 19th century was not yet recognized by the older generations and the Spanish government, because the Spanish would build their structures to be closed in, no, it would not really open out towards the streets or the city, but would be closed in from the rest of the world. I mean, if you look at Intramuros, it's just already a closed-in community. Then you go into the buildings, like for example, the monasteries were all very closed in. If you look at San Agustin today, the garden is actually in the middle and it's surrounded by walls. So the Americans opened this up, opened the walls and the windows, and allowed the air to flow through, especially for a hospital. And during the time, what would be the major diseases? There would be tuberculosis, cholera, dysentery, and these are actually diseases that are a result of poor sanitation, dirty water, um, bad air, so to speak. So these were solved, or the American architects tried to solve this through the design of the hospitals back then, which brings to mind what we are undergoing through right now, because now we're realizing that we can't just air condition ourselves with COVID, and God knows the kind of viruses that we'll have in the future. We need to look into opening up our spaces to air and sunlight, because COVID has proven that it's actually the healthier option. So, okay, what else? There's a high portico with triangular pediment. This is, of course, the echo of neoclassical architecture, which was the architecture of the City Beautiful movement. If you remember the lecture I had last week, you know, Greco-Roman elements that were applied. But if you look at this building, you have the neoclassical elements in the middle. You have the pediment, and then you have the pilasters with an arc in the middle. And then you have to the sides something that looks like a bahay na bato from the Spanish. So it really is an interesting combination of styles. That was also quite effective. That would also fulfill the function of a good hospital. So I think this is really what was the greatest contribution of Burnham and Parsons. And also don't forget that part of the formula of these buildings would be lawns and greeneries. That was part of the formula. You can't just have large open windows without gardens because I don't think the air will flow through. So the importance of greenery was applied by by Parsons based on the recommendation of Burnham from the Manila plan, but this time in a smaller scale. You know, this time applied to singular buildings. These are views of the PGH from the inside. So this would be the main building from what I was showing earlier. You go through and then you have an open courtyard, possibly influenced also by the Spanish uh, churches with courtyards. That was also a typology of Spanish architecture where you have the convent next to the church, and that would sometimes surround an inner garden because the Spanish also were in the 19th century. They were also keen botanists and were collecting also herbs and plants for medicinal purposes. You know, like the famous Father Blanco's garden in in San Agustin. So you can see here the arches that were applied by Parsons to a hospital, uh, and also would allow the free flow of air through the corridors, through the buildings, and inside the rooms of the patients. And you also have to remember that the PGH back then was relatively uh, affected, is that the right word, by the sea, by the ocean, by Manila Bay. It's relatively near if you think about it. And if you remove the tall buildings that we have now at the back of the PGH, which was not um, which was not around then, you could imagine that perhaps the sea breezes would be able to reach the hospital and then affect positively the patients inside the hospital. Then you have the tile roofs, and then you have this the extension of the walls that would cover the roof behind. Some parts are already galvanized iron, I believe, because that was also a new material that was brought in by the Americans. Although I think what they did, they would still cover uh, the galvanized iron with the tiles. There used to be a movement against using clay tiles back then because it had a propensity to fall off. If they're old tiles, it could fall off the walls, the roof, and hit passersby, which would probably be deadly, and also for earthquakes. But it's just a matter of maintenance, I suppose. But there was, I think, a time when the government was campaigning against the use of clay tiles, and eventually it succeeded. By the 1940s, you would already see less and less buildings using clay tiles. Uh, but I really like them. I wish that we could revive clay tiles. In Indonesia now, Oh, well, in Indonesia for the past decades, the government uh, taught the people to make their own clay tiles. So if even if you go to the poorer parts of Indonesia, you can see clay tiles because the people were taught how to make clay tiles and use it for their roofing. And the illegal settlers of Indonesia, if you see them from afar, they still look beautiful because of the clay tiles, as opposed to you know, the the corrugated tiles that look really horrible when it's old and rusty. Okay, this is another building by Parsons. This is the Army Navy Club, and it was a private club. It had it's a small boat club, a casino, public baths, the 100 by 200 square meter space opposite the Manila Hotel. And so it was three buildings composed of the club, a dancing hall, and a separate structure for kitchen and servants' quarters. So it would be separate buildings that would be connected by corridors that would then have open arches uh, that would admit again sea breezes from Manila Bay. And then, but it was already using reinforced concrete and a flat roof. It was noted here, which Parsons eventually stopped using because he realized that the problem of rain and leaks uh, was a common result uh, with a flat roof. And it's interesting to note that even today, when we design with our buildings with flat roofs, we still have that problem uh, because architecture may change, but the climate of a country doesn't. So uh, this was a problem during Parsons' time, and it is still a problem today. Uh, the issue of roofing. So again, you see the arches here that Parsons applied uh, as per as per his observation of the city. What else? High ceilings for maximized ventilation, large windows spanning from columns to columns. So you have this and this ones. No? So you have the columns here, all large windows, which would recall the Bahay na Bato back then, and impose an arched entrance here, which would be a loggia that would shade the porch, the entrance porch from the sun, as well as these parts here. So the Americans were really conscious of the heat. And of course, we can't blame them. This is an elevation, the front elevation. And well, this one is really neoclassical architecture, neo-Renaissance even. That would be common, I suppose, to those who graduated from the L'École des Beaux-Arts. So you have the symmetrical plan, and then you have the arches, which would also be qualities that you could find in Europe. Uh, because of course, Spain was also from Europe, so they brought in arches. In the Philippines, which I'm sure Parsons and Burnham were happy to see and realize that they can also use it again when they put up their new buildings. I found this plan of the Army Navy Club. So this is the building that we just saw. And this is the dancing pavilion and the kitchen and the servants' quarters, the help. These are all open areas, landscape. This is like tennis courts. And you can see that the Manila Bay was right by its doorstep, so to speak. So the Americans really enjoyed the bay. At the time, as I said, they saw fresh air and sun and sea breezes as healthy uh, for people. So of course they use that. This is the plan of the second floor of this building. So you can see here, it's just a symmetrical plan because it was also like a hotel. And here you have a bandstand and balconies. This would probably be open. You can look down here towards the ground floor. I think this has been, renovated by architect Palafox. It's now a hotel. I haven't been there because when they opened, I think it was just a month before the pandemic. But I'm aware that it has been renovated. Okay, and the other work of Parsons was, of course, the Manila Hotel, and it was built to rival the other hotels in Asia and Europe, like the Raffles, uh, the colonial hotels of Egypt, and parts of Asia, like I said, Raffles in Singapore, uh, the colonial hotels of Thailand and Cambodia also. So, built in 1909, it was meant to rival Malacanang. I don't know why. Maybe the they just wanted to. Again, I suppose it would be their way of saying that okay, Malacanang is a Spanish-built uh, structure. The Manila Hotel is an American-built structure, and this is how we do it. So it was also a bit of flexing their muscles as new colonial powers. So it was built in 1909, took 3 years. It was opened not to commemorate July 4 Independence Day in 1912. It was built on a reclaimed area, so it was already they were already starting to reclaim Manila Bay back then. So you could imagine that if if you look at the boulevard today, anything beyond that would be water back then during the American period. But this part was one of the first reclaimed areas uh, of Manila. So this is a view of the hotel seen from the walls of Intramuros. So we're looking at it from Intramuros. This will be the golf course outside the walls. I guess it will still be part of the moat that was left behind. This is the Anda Monument. I think it's still there. And then you have here the hotel, and beyond that will be Manila Bay, which back then was already accepting uh, uh, ocean liners that would have tourists. So like cruise ships, cruise ships. Other views of the hotel, this is a clearer view. So it's a high-rise structure. This was, again, California style. It's an H-shaped plan. Well-ventilated rooms on two wings. This will be one wing, and this will be the second wing, with vistas of the harbor, Luneta, and Intramuros. Remember, Burnham was particular about vistas. He was always saying, open up the buildings to vistas, but also open your buildings to be seen by the people, so that they will realize the importance of government. That was how he viewed vistas. And then the top floor was a viewing deck. So this would be viewing decks for various functions, including watching the Navy, the American Navy. And this is another view of the hotel at the edge of the river. So you can imagine if you're up there, you can see all the way to, I guess, even the islands of the bay. And of course, the famous sunset. And then the Elks Club, which was now occupied by the Museo Pambata. I don't know if you recognize the building. It is along the boulevard also. And then, so it's a three-story building, similar to the Army Navy Club, which is behind here. The one earlier that I showed you was just behind the Elks Club. The Elks Club was like a gentleman's club from the 19th century, which was petitioned by the American residents of the Philippines back then to be uh, to be put up here in Manila. So the Elks Club is like like a Lions Club or a Rotary Club for the Americans. So if you imagine, across this would be the Manila Hotel, and here would be Luneta. So again, Mission Revival style, then in Luneta Park. So this would be part of a compound of buildings together with the Manila Hotel that was all designed by Parsons. Here is another view of both the sorry, this is the Army and Navy Club. So this is the back view of the building. Uh, this is part of the H-shaped building also. And then you have here opened balconies for vistas, large windows, arches, deep loggias, and archways to shield from the sun, and landscaping uh, around the building, and even on the walls of the buildings themselves. I just wanted, okay, this is Museo Pambata now, and this is what it was before. I just wanted to show you how it was and how it is now. Of course, it doesn't look exactly the same because this was bombed during the war and this was just reconstructed. So when you reconstruct, you would need to cut expenses. So sometimes the original design may not be followed. Okay, so Parsons also prepared plans for schoolhouses, and it's called the Gabaldon School buildings. He created about 15 types of plans for the school buildings, and these were put up all over the country. You know? So as far as, I think even parts of Mindanao, but a lot of them were in Luzon and Visayas. These were constructed between 1907 and 1915, named after an assemblyman called Isauro Gabaldon of Nueva Ecija, who authored the Gabaldon Act, which appropriated 1 million pesos for the construction of public schools, modern public schools. The Americans, of course, established the educational system in the country, and part of that they realized was that you'd have to put up buildings, school buildings, because there were none. You know, during the Spanish, there were not a lot of schools to begin with, and whenever there would be schools, they would usually just be made of nipa and bamboo materials. So this time, Parsons came in and came up with a formula for putting up schools, and he, of course, recommended the use of reinforced concrete, as you can see here. But he followed the characteristics of old Philippine structures, like the Bahay Kubo, which had high pitch roofs, large overhangs that would shield from the sun. And you have here the capital windows, which he recommended for the buildings. This would open up, you know, like the windows of an old bahay na bato. And so Parsons applied this to the Gabaldon schoolhouses. So standard size, 9 by 7 meters. So this would be, I suppose, the minimum size. They did many plans, 15 plans, and I'm sure the locals would also reinterpret it in the different ways. But nonetheless, there were the must-haves. You know? So it has to be elevated off the ground to create ventilation and to cool the structure, much like a bahay kubo, and but made of a new material that time, which was reinforced concrete. And then you have here the large windows made up of kapi shells. And then, yeah, and swift construction, of course. So that was also a requirement that it should be put up fairly fast. And then raised 1.2 meters. This would be an interesting dimension. 1.2 meters off the ground on a platform made of wood or concrete. So the flooring would have wood if there was wood available. Otherwise, it would be concrete. And then tall ceilings. As you can see, if you can see this lady here, that's the ceiling is actually more than double her height. No? So if she was 5 feet tall, for example, this would be 12 foot, 12 foot ceilings. The rooms would have 12-foot ceilings, which I think it's great because it really can admit air. I'm not so sure though about these chimneys. I don't know if those are really chimneys, but that's curious. Some variations, this would also have gables, much like what they used also in PNU. And these are these are the existing ones that are being renovated and preserved. In the past, in the recent years, there's been a move to conserve the Gabaldon schoolhouses. This is also again another example and interpreted differently. Here you have this Neo-Gothic arches. I think this is somewhere in Bicol. But then you have the common features would be the raised floor and then the large windows. And this one is a school, a Gabaldon school in Abra, which has beautiful arches. This reminds me of Renaissance buildings in Florence. Uh, One in particular, which is also a hospital in Florence that has these beautiful arches. Um, and if you do arches, you have to follow a certain formula, otherwise it won't look correct. And these one are beautifully made, I must say, and beautifully proportioned, also in relation to the colors here. They are now protected under Philippine law, the Gabaldon school buildings, under RA 11194, which says that these are cultural properties uh, and that they should be protected, and that a certain amount of budget should be allotted for their protection. And rightly so. I mean, these are beautiful examples of neoclassical architecture in the provinces. Um, and I've seen some. I don't know if you guys have seen these. Beautiful proportions. Okay, this is a house. I just wanted to include this because during the American period, I think the examples of Parsons was carried over into residential houses. If you look at this, this is called a chalet, an American period chalet, which was somewhat inspired by the Bahay Kubo, but interpreted through the eyes of, I guess, American builders and architects. You have the porches around, which was absent in the Bahay Kubo, but yet you also have the pitch roofs, you have the wide overhangs, and you have the raised floor. This time is covered by a wall, but you have these perforated windows down below that would allow air to flow through. Then you have here the porch, which was this one. The porches here would be common in the Bahay na Bato. So it's also a nice combination of different influences that has come up with this typology, which is the Salet, Tsalet. That was how it was spelled before, but actually came from the word chalet. Okay, so these are the other designs of Parsons. He designed the University Hall in UP Manila. Again, it's an interesting combination of neoclassical architecture, and you have the Spanish styles, Philippine Spanish architecture of the Bahay na Bato right on top. Then you have the gardens around it, and then you have the portico, the shaded portico of the entrance. Unfortunately, this was also bombed during the war, and but you can still see this. The Americans reconstructed buildings after the war that were built by Americans. So those were the ones that they reconstructed. So the
But
National
Gerry,
Museum,
isn't this
yes,
one along Padre Faura going to
yeah.
okay?
Yeah, it's
It's
near
still
the
there,
Supreme
no?
Court. It's still there. So it's been
Yeah.
thankfully reconstructed. I don't know if the reconstruction was faithful. I don't think so, but nonetheless, parts of it are there. Um, However, the Americans refused to finance the reconstruction of Spanish buildings or Spanish period buildings. That's why Intramuros was left in ruins as late as until the 1970s, because they were not reconstructed by the repatriation budget of the Americans after the war. So yeah, so that's why Intramuros was left in ruins for a long, long time. Parsons also designed government buildings. It is the Laguna Capitol, which he designed. You can see here the flat roofs, but I don't know. Maybe it's not really a flat roof, but It would just be an extension of the walls to cover the roof to just make it look more monumental, I suppose, no? And not less. And not look and look less like a house. Am I saying it right? It will look less like a house and more of a building, because of course it's a capital building, the seat of the provincial government. If I'm not mistaken, it's an American flag. But then again, you see here neoclassical architecture. Then, but you still see the arches uh, and the Paco train station, which we can still see in all its ruined splendor, which I hope they will take care of because it is by Parsons. Look how beautiful it is. It was before it was bombed. So you can see the proportions. It was 1920. I suppose back then, Parsons was the #1 architect in the country by virtue of him being American and also by virtue of him being modern, I suppose, during that time. So again, here you see the deep loggias, a shade against the sun, but you still have the neoclassical architecture, and with all its trimmings and trappings, that would say, I'm a serious building, but I'm also a symbol of a trustworthy government or a trustworthy institution like transport systems. That was really one of the intentions of neoclassical architecture, to show that these are the qualities of stability and strength and trustworthiness was actually translated into buildings by way of neoclassical features. Uh, Back then, the purveyors of neoclassical architecture thought that the the highest point of human history was during the Greek and the Roman period. So when you create a building that will be about government or public institutions, it would be the Roman Greco vocabulary is the best one to use and to communicate that message to the people. They Parsons also designed public markets. This was the old Paco public market in 1911. Again, the Americans were very conscious of sanitation, and so they created markets that were made out of concrete. They saw concrete as the best material when it comes to sanitation because it's easy to clean. There are no, unlike stone or wood, there are no gaps or crevices where bacteria or insects can hide, and so reinforced concrete was applied for markets. What were markets before the American period? I would suppose. I don't know if you've seen old photos of markets. It would just be people that would lay down their banigs or cloth on the floor and then put the produce there, whether it's meat or fish or vegetable, and then people would just buy off the street. So this would just be all over, and you can imagine how some of these markets would be the causes of diseases and even death and sickness, of course. So the public markets were deemed as important structures uh, for the Americans to establish in Manila, and also for the health and safety of the people, especially food. Parsons also designed outside of Manila. This is the Baguio Mansion House. I don't know how it looks now. I haven't been there in a long time, but again, you see here a neoclassical facade and then gardens around it. This was the house of the president when he or she would go to Baguio. So this is government property, but it was used already during the American period. Parsons also designed the Cebu Customs Office. I'm sure this has been reconstructed, but you can see the qualities here that Parsons espoused. You have the neoclassical entrance, and then you have the large windows and the extension of the floor, the wall that will go up and hide the sloped roof behind it. This has been, I think, renovated during the time of President Arroyo and turned into like the Malacanang of the South. So I think this was also been reconstructed in recent years also. Uh, yeah. And then the Capiz provincial capital, which thankfully looks pretty okay. Sorry. So you still have here the elements of neoclassicism. Then you have the piece windows, which was used by uh, Parsons as part of his vocabulary of architectural elements. This could possibly be an extension because if you look at the structure, you have the symmetrical plan, which was very common for neoclassical architecture. There. And what else? These are the Nueva Ecija capital also by Burnham, by Parsons. You have here uh, the facade that would be that looks like the PNU facade that we saw earlier. But of course, this has been reconstructed. So you can see modern materials already being used in the reconstruction. What else? These are the piers that, okay, this may not have been designed by Parsons, but I just wanted to show you this series of photos just to demonstrate the influence of Parsons to later buildings. And this is a pier in Manila, which, as I said before, was a stop for cruise liners. Surprise, surprise, no? Back then, Manila was seen as actually a beautiful city. And so these piers were there were a number of these piers. I think in the last presentation, Jim, of some of your class, I saw piers being redesigned.
Yeah.
However, when the Japanese came, these were the first to be bombed
Yeah.
because, of course, the Japanese saw that these were potential landing areas for American ships. So these were the first to go during that time. So it's basically you get off the ship and then you go through here, you get processed, much like the airports that we have now. Then you go out into the city. These are old buildings. Also, this is a government science lab. Here it's more really uh, the mission style of it's more evident here, like this shaded parts of the building. Uh, but I just wanted to show you this because it's reinforced concrete. It has the elements of American Californian architecture that was imported to the Philippines. But there are also Spanish elements, as you can see here. I think these towers are more Spanish influenced than American. So again, you see an amalgam of styles in the buildings before. Oops, is that it? I think so. Sorry.
Okay.
So there you go, guys. I hope you didn't. You got something from that. So, I just wanted to show you how Parsons was actually instrumental in creating this new kind of architecture that was applied uh, in Manila after the Burnham Plan, and which eventually influenced the rest of the country with this new type of architecture. So there. Uh, wait, I have a
I
message.
want some reaction from the students because I have a feeling they were working on their projects.
Uh, okay, guys, if you have any questions, then
Reactions, guys, or questions.
reaction, yeah.
I want to make sure that you guys learn something. Mark, say something.
Very smart.
Raven.
Hi, hello.
Any
Hi,
reaction?
Mark.
Positive.
Raven.
Hi, sir.
Hello. Hi.
Realization.
Um, Thank you, sir, for your time. I learned a lot from the examples of the Spanish and the American influences with the Philippine climate. And yeah, yun. Thank you, sir.
Allison,
Yeah.
any
Hi, Allison talaga, sir. I was actually thinking of what you said about Burnham, like putting him also in good light. Because one of the things I learned also in his talk is that even though it was a good idea to have the City Beautiful movement, given the little time that they have and it's their first time to have a colony, it most of it was really just based on the ideals of the Americans. It was purely mostly by observation rather than conversation at those times. So that's but there's also good things that come out of it based on what you discussed, how their intentions, like reframing my mind that although they were well, not colonizers, we were, well, still, they were handed over by the Spanish and then bought through the, I think, Treaty of Paris.
For $20 million.
Yeah, for 2 million, which is barely anything.
That's
I
how we
mean,
were worth. We
yeah.
came, it was a package, you know, that we were, it was a package deal. It was 20 million for the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico.
Oh
So
wow.
it was
I was
a garage sale of colonies.
It was 3 colonies at one go.
Yes. That
So,
20 million included Guam and Puerto Rico.
so sir, among the three, we were the first to be developed
I
from the.
Okay, ganito yan eh. Dami, colonialism has its pros and cons. Yeah, of course, if you look at the bad, there's the bad. But if you look at the good, there's the good also. And as I said earlier, they also established sanitation and hospitals and schools, also very important. If the Spanish established churches, then the Americans established that. But they were also into trade. Americans, well, most colonials are also into, they would see the advantages of having a colony in Asia at that time because then they would be near China and Japan and the rest of Asia, China and Japan especially, because these would be large markets for them to sell their goods to. So the Philippines was seen as pivotal for the Americans back then, like it is now. That's why we're being fought over by China and America. But that was also about trade. So why did they make the Philippines, uh, I would believe, nicer than Puerto Rico? Because they wanted to show to the rest of Asia that, okay, this is what an American colony would be. Parang ano rin, konting yabang, na, we're rich and powerful, but we're also nice. So look at this beautiful city. It was like paano ba? A showcase city. Manila was really a showcase city for American colonial power. So there's always a connection of power to architecture, especially colonial architecture.
That's why I was always wondering if the reason why they plan Luneta as like a mirror of Washington D.C. is because they really want to showcase Manila or the Philippines as a showcase of their colony. So
Well, they were,
like
yeah,
they wanted to
not
have a
to.
capital. They have all those government buildings. They have the National Library, Smithsonian Institute, all of those government buildings in one area, very much like Washington.
Yeah, very much like Washington and Chicago. And it was a city beautiful formula where you have a big open space with parks right in front of the government buildings.
Yeah.
So and then you elevate the government buildings, so that you give it more prominence.
How did
Then you have the open space. But this time they saw that there's a beautiful bay, which was absent in
yeah,
Washington.
that's true. That's our asset actually. But I think somebody said that while it is an asset, it's also a negative thing because it's a sunset bay, like the government building looking at the sun that is going down. So I think I heard it from someone.
Oh,
It's just
come
a
on.
trivial. It's just a trivial thing.
That's a load of crap. I love sunsets. my apartment faces the west and it's terribly
No,
hot
I know.
in the sun, but I get beautiful sunsets. So I
Yeah.
will trade the heat for a beautiful sunset.
Yeah. What else, guys? Any feedback?
Sir, ako.
Sige, Kevin.
Yes, Kev.
Turn your camera, huwag mo medyo para polite lang.
Hi, sir.
Hi.
First of all, I just want to say thank you, rin, sir, for taking your time to give us a lecture. And then, medyo na-miss ko lang kasi his start, sir.
O nga
So-
pala, no?
Diba,
My last-
excuse
This is
lang,
my last
Ilonggo, di ba?
class.
Ilonggo ang inasal, no?
Inasal?
Ilonggo. Oo.
Yeah.
Tribute ko sa'yo, Sir Gerry. Oh.
Galing yan. Anong saan ko bumili?
Chicken Bacolod.
I'll tell you where the best is.
Okay,
It's
sige.
along Pasong Tamo. It's called CHE. Hanapin nyo.
Sige,
That's the best.
sige,
Inasal.
after Kevin. Sorry, Kevin, I interrupted you.
Okay lang, sir. Okay lang. I was actually surprised kasi I didn't know. I thought it was gonna be a lecture about Burnham again. And then I didn't know we were gonna go deeper into Parsons pa. And then it was more than just a macro plan. It was also about the micro experiences in a local context, and then how they used foreign components and principles to improve our local what we had locally back then. So nakakatuwa, sir, kasi I never saw this side and this deep of a discussion about Parsons and the like, other than Burnham. And
Parsons has always been, and up to now, under the shadow of Burnham.
So,
yun nga,
Parsons. Kasi
Okay.
Burnham 6 weeks lang dito eh. Ano lang siya eh. Parang concept. Although maganda rin ang plano niya. Ha? But you know naman when we do our plans, it's the execution is the other part. And I think what's remarkable with Parsons also is yung interpretation niya. Although nakita na ni Burnham, si Burnham magaling din ha. Umikot siya sa 6 weeks. Nakita niya itong mga elements sa simbahan, sa mga
Yeah,
bahay.
in a matter of
And then,
yes, sir.
I'm sure siguro that time, telegrama siguro sila ni Parsons na punta ka na dyan. But I think they were also working together. But it was really Parsons who executed the plans. And yun, as you said, not just bringing in the new styles, but also recognizing the context of the country. Ano ba yung problema ng Manila? Ano bang ginawa ng ibang buildings na pwede natin gawin din pero mas i-improve natin. So and also as I mentioned, the issues of climate and weather and yung sakit na dulot ng stagnant water. Alam niyo ba na dati ang tubig ay deep, yung well, yung hukay, like a well. Now, at a certain point, if your wastewater, which was just thrown into the ground, siguro into a hole in the ground, that eventually seeped through to the water supply of the wells. So, iniinom ng tao yon, kaya sila nagkaka-cholera. Hindi kasi nila alam na may connection pala ang sakit nila doon sa tubig na iniinom nila. Because, the science back then in the 19th century was not yet as advanced. Ibang penicillin was only invented 20th century na.
So Parsons was not covered in our history classes, history of architecture classes.
Sorry.
I'm not audible ba? Sorry. So Parsons wasn't included in the history of architecture classes.
I did.
Yes.
I did.
My
But maybe not all teachers
Okay,
would.
but it's not part of the syllabus. Like that it should be covered.
It should be, if you're talking of the Burnham Plan, which I think all ArchDes 4 should,
I think
kasi Philippine architecture eh. Eh di dapat
I think it should
kailangan
cover
si
Philippine
Parsons.
architecture.
Oo, kaso lang, I don't think it's really been analyzed in depth how Parsons designed the
Exactly.
buildings.
And that's the reason why even architects, professionals already are not knowledgeable about how Manila could have been. They just know Burnham on a surface level. And then,
Yeah,
and what more with Parsons? So the moment they learn about Parsons, I think they'll start appreciating the existing buildings that we still have, that designed by Parsons.
yeah. Yes, and kahit na-reconstructed siya, makikita mo pa rin yung ganda ng gawa ni Parsons. Eh. If you look at PGH, even now, when I glance at PGH, I still see the beauty of that front building na, ang ganda. Alam mo, ang neoclassical building, basta tama ang proportions mo. Yung ganda niya is eternal. It's classic, kaya nga classic eh. Basta do it properly. Huwag ka lang mag-arc na hindi mo kinocompute.
Yeah. So what they call that? Like a lot of the school of thought now is really modernist, but they still. But for me, before you get there, you need to sort of recognize and acknowledge what has been done before and learn from it. So that's why these lectures and this mapping of history is very important in our design classes. That's why it really surprised me that it wasn't included in the syllabus, or it's not part of the outline.
Dapat kasama.
Yeah, I mean,
Jim, but
look at the reaction of Kevin. No? They appreciated how much Parsons influenced and how much he incorporated a lot of our conditions in the design of the buildings, and how he invented some of the building systems.
sayang pag hindi natin alam yan as architects. Because as I said, architecture, the styles of architecture and trends may change, but the conditions of the country remains. The weather is still the same.
Yeah.
The climate, the quality of the sunlight is still the same. Di man mag-iiba yan eh. But also, Jim, I just want to mention, as I said earlier in my talk, na with COVID, parang bumalik tayo sa realization that we need cross ventilation, we need good air and sunlight.
Yeah, actually,
as requirements for health and safety now.
When I was studying, everyone was already saying that the buildings before were actually designed better than the buildings of today. They have so much sensitivity to our climate, to our conditions, and Parsons is an excellent example of that. And what's happening now, I think, with the pandemic, it's just opening our eyes again, that reminding everyone about our roots, that we have to go back to our roots.
Yeah, and that the qualities that were recognized by Parsons back then that would be beneficial to our health are now coming back. We're now being reminded that
we're not saying that we are going to copy what he designed, but the systems and the sensitivity and the acknowledgement of the conditions, I hope our students will learn from.
Yeah, and I think also the direct application of architecture to solve a problem.
Yeah.
Like for example, market. Let's choose a material that will eliminate sickness due to unsanitary conditions. So yun. As I said, the conditions haven't changed. We still need to clean up the city. We still need to more so now. But guys, I just want to say I'm excited about your plan to turn that part of Manila near the City Hall. I think it's a great idea.
It's more manageable.
But remember also the advice of Burnham was, because I think it still applies, vistas. Burnham wanted to use the Pasig River, hindi lang natuloy. He wanted to create green belts along the Pasig and use it for transportation, which
I forgot to mention to you that we expanded the site towards the the Quiapo area across Arceros Park, because
Yeah.
a lot of
Oh,
the
good.
site in Manila City Hall are either heritage areas or gardens, and we don't want to touch that. And so I felt like we have so little space to work with. That's why we expanded towards the opposite of
Yeah.
Arceros.
Great.
Yeah.
So you're now going to start from City Hall all the way down to Metropolitan Theater. Is
Yeah,
that correct?
theater, post office building, and then the moment you
Ooh.
cross um, Quezon Bridge, the one going to Quiapo,
Yes.
there's
We're going to Quiapo.
there's an estero there that will be our boundary, so that we can cover a portion of that part, but not
Wow.
including Quiapo anymore. It will be too big for them.
Yeah. Wow, that's wonderful. Something to look forward to. A lot of people
So
have been
in a way,
dreaming about that.
we are including the Pasig River. So there's an experience that they are going to develop in that part of the river. So it will be from Quezon Bridge to Ayala Bridge. So it will be
Yeah.
a unique
Uh-huh.
river
Uh-huh.
experience.
And then including the post office of Arellano.
Yeah, but most likely they won't touch that one.
Because Arellano was the
Is he a national artist already? Sorry, I'm not.
huh?
Is it predecessor, sir, of what?
No, successor. That's the word.
Yeah.
Juan Arellano is the successor of Burnham, of Parsons. So I'm glad you're doing that. And the Metropolitan, which is also by him. Pero ibang style. Parang yan ang Coconut Palace of his time, ang Metropolitan. Kasi iniba niya eh. Imagine, very neoclassical ng post office. Tapos yung paggawa niya ng Metropolitan Theater, ibang-iba. Parang art deco na with native motifs.
Local elements. Yeah.
Local motifs. So it would be an interesting. So yeah, guys, I'm looking forward to that. I think everyone will be interested in what you're going to do. There's been always a lot of attempt to try to recreate the glory of Manila, ad nauseum. But with this part of yours that you somehow framed it into a more manageable area, but still as interesting because tawid lang yan ng Taft yung area niyo. I think would be very, very interesting. I'm looking forward to present that to the public. So,
All right.
yeah.
Anything else, guys? Do you have any questions to Sir Gerry before we let him go? I guess there's none. No? Okay.
Okay.
And
guys,
turn on
and if
your
you have any
camera, guys. Say bye to Sir Gerry properly.
Hi, sir.
Bye,
Yes,
sir.
sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you po.
sir.
picture na
Yes,
muna
sir.
na lang.
Thank you.
Picture pala.
Sure.
Picture down.
Okay, one. Oh,
Wait lang, wait.
Julian.